Although House of the Dragon largely stemmed the widespread fan disappointment caused by the final seasons of Game of Thrones, it has still generated its own share of frustrations that have kept it from being a full return to glory for HBO's flagship franchise. A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms doesn't aspire to be the franchise's redeemer. Still, it is the most purely enjoyable and heartfelt excursion to Westeros in some time, and one that can serve as an entry point to the franchise for viewers who may feel they are too far behind in all the lore to join now.
So, Sir Duncan the Tall.
Set almost 100 years before the events depicted in Game of Thrones, and based on the Hedge Knight, the first entry in George R.R. Martin's novella series Tales of Dunk and Egg, A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms follows the towering, dim-witted Dunk, played with lovable oafishness by Peter Claffey. Dunk is the squire to a recently deceased Hedge Knight. Dunk travels the backroads of Westeros as he looks to compete in a jousting tourney so that he too can become a knight. Along the way, Dunk encounters Egg, played by Dexter Ansell, small of stature but commanding in screen presence. Egg's a precocious bald child who wants nothing more than to become Dunk's squire.
Every knight needs a squire, and you look like you need one more than most.
These two oddballs soon cross paths with an assortment of rough-and-tumble characters bearing some of Westeros' most legendary surnames. Dunk initially rebuffs Egg, suspecting the mouthy kid is just a thief, but he eventually sees more of his younger self in this strange boy who's determined to be his squire. The insolent Egg is mysteriously wise in the ways of knighthood and in how things in Westeros operate for reasons that will not become clear until later in the first season.
You know every knight in the Seven Kingdoms, then?
The good ones.
Dunk and Egg are two young people just trying to find their way in this gloomy, life-is-cheap world where the disparity between the haves and have-nots could not be more, stark.
How good a knight are you?
You'll see.
A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms doesn't require one to know the past Game of Thrones shows, to have read any of the source material, or to have any extensive knowledge of the franchise's fantasy lore. While dragons remain a not-too-distant memory in this period, and the Targaryens still hold the Iron Throne, this is a Westeros without magic, White Walkers, or any of the genre trappings many viewers may have come to expect and appreciate from the franchise. There may not be any dragons, but A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms still offers the whoring, violence, dark humor, and occasional full frontal nudity the franchise is also notable for. While that lack of fantasy might seem like a deficit to some, this grounded approach recenters viewers' attention on the very human characters inhabiting this particular time and place in Westeros. Rather than going the sword and sorcery route, A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms instead blends aspects from underdog sports movies, rites of passage sagas, and archetypal badass and child pairings that the likes of Lone Wolf and Cub, Logan on X-23, the T-800 and John Connor, and the Mandalorian and Grogu have all employed to great effect. Dunk, though, is far from being the badass any of those characters are. Dunk is an everyman looking to make his mark in a field dominated by the great houses. All he has going for him is his size and sheer force of will. He's a Rocky-like palooka who can endure a beating and keep going, as evidenced by the show's violent jousting tourneys, realized with a grimy brutality not seen since Ridley Scott's The Last Duel. Thanks to its compact storytelling, A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms never feels bloated or like it's spinning its wheels waiting to get some big payoff the way that House of the Dragon and Game of Thrones sometimes did. Some flashbacks aside, this first season takes place over just a few days, so it's pretty close to a real-time adventure in Westeros, where friendships and rivalries are forged quickly but deeply due to life-or-death circumstances. Smaller both in scale and ambition than its predecessors, A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms never quite plumbs the moral depths and entirely foregoes the dragon-riding fantasy highs of the previous two Game of Thrones series. Still, it provides the viewer with core protagonists one can remain emotionally invested in, something the overall franchise has occasionally lost sight of in favor of spectacle.
It's like a knight, but sadder.
No, I'm not.
It's got to
sad.
sleep in the hedges because no lord will have it.
The first season of A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms is getting an 8. Brought to life with heart and humor by the series' many talented writers and Peter Claffey and Dexter Saul Ansell's endearing performances, the wonderful brotherly bond between Dunk and Egg gives the fantasy-free A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms a great sense of charm, keeping the viewer engaged in where this underdog duo's travels take them next.
And there are no true knights among you!
Hey everybody, thanks for watching our review of A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. Here to chat about it a little more, our resident Westeros scholar and the reviewer of the first season of this latest Game of Thrones spinoff, IGN's Jim Vejvoda. Jim, how's it going, man?
Hello, Clint. Good to talk to you, dude.
Before we get going, I just, right off the bat, you were just plain old excited to claim the review for this one. You really wanted to review. So before we get into talking more about A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, I just want to ask you why. Like, what is it about Game of Thrones that had you hooked and had you excited to review this one?
Well, you know, it's been kind of a long time coming. I've been with the company a long time, and so I was part of the crew that was covering Game of Thrones when it was on, and I felt a little bit left out of the fun because I hadn't read the books. And so for those first, 4 seasons or 5 seasons where they still had book material to adapt, people were having jokes at my expense of all my theorizing and, isn't that sweet? You think that's going to happen? And then once they ran out of material, then we're all in the same boat. And, they weren't such smart asses then. But I was like, you know what? If they ever do another Game of Thrones, I want to make sure I actually have read the stuff. And so when House of the Dragon was in development, I read Fire and Blood, and I'm a big history buff. And that was one of the things that really appealed to me about Game of Thrones is that George R. R. Martin created this kind of fantastical alternate history version of medieval Europe. And, whether it's the Wars of the Roses or the Anarchy with, House of the Dragon, I was really into the actual British and European history. Yeah. And so seeing that kind of tweaked and adapted for a fantasy format was really cool. So all of which is to say, when A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms rolled around, I was already doing a lot of feature stuff for House of the Dragon, but I hadn't reviewed it. And I'm like, you know what? I think it's time for me to jump on that.
You're due for one. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And then when I found out the show was only half an hour long each episode, I'm like, even better.
Yeah.
That's less work.
No,
it's actually the same amount of work. You just spend less time watching a show.
It's all words you have to write regardless, no matter how long it takes you to watch it.
Really, the great draw, I think, for Knight of the Seven Kingdoms is you don't have to know any of those other shows. You don't have to have read the books. Does it help? Sure. But it's not a requirement. This is, if you've been wanting to get on that bandwagon for the last 10 years and you've man, there's just too much homework. There's too much stuff to watch. You don't have to worry about it with this one. You just jump right in. And
all my friends are going to make fun of me for not reading the book and my stupid theories. You don't
have to worry about any of that. And I'll explain kind of why, because this story, it's based on some novellas that George R. R. Martin wrote, which are collected in this one fine and handy dandy.
You got a bookmark in there. You've been doing homework.
I know. I've been reading, Clint. It's one of my many skills. But it's the first novella, I should say, is called The Hedge Knight, and that is basically season 1, and it's pretty faithful to it, down to some of the lines and ways some characters meet their fates and stuff like that. But what's great about it is that this is the period where it's not really a spoiler, but we know that House of Dragon will end with dragons no longer existing in Westeros. So that by the time that
they've been gone for a while, yeah.
Yeah. So about a century later, when Game of Thrones happens, Daenerys brings them back, all of that. So this is set in the roughly 100 years, about 90 years in between those two events. So there's no folklore, no prophecies you have to know about. Names are mentioned and there are some Targaryens that show up, but you don't have to have seen anything. And so you can just go into this, get engrossed in this world, and just enjoy this journey of the two main characters who are really the best reason to watch the show. It gives it its charm and its heart and its warmth and its humor, and which are things that I don't normally think of when I think of Game of Thrones.
Certainly not high on the list of Game of Thrones appropriate adjectives that spring to mind. But I mean, but that is an interesting thing about this show, though. Is And talking about this as a Game of Thrones sort of franchise entry or spin-off or whatever we want to call it, like you mentioned, and you mentioned a lot of things in your review about the things that it doesn't have, like no dragons, no magic, no, it's much lighter. Like, I mean, it is still recognizably a Game of Thrones show, though. Yeah.
Yeah. It's definitely still Westeros. There's the crude kind of body humor. There's, full frontal nudity. There's sex
Oh,
and
of course,
violence.
yeah.
And, people getting their heads smashed in, and there are Targaryens in the show, and it's all, there are a lot of characters of the great houses. They're not the ones that we know, but like there's a character, Lionel Baratheon, and he's sort of the life of the party kind of among the knights. And so like there are things you'll recognize from Game of Thrones, but if you haven't seen it, you're not going to be left out. Everything is name checked. If you need to know something, like dragons are name checked, but it's like us talking about dinosaurs,
Sure.
Yeah, those exist at one time, but they're not in our world, our life.
Don't have to worry about them.
Yeah,
The way to the
I mean,
store.
the biggest thing I would say that is you see in all of the Game of Thrones shows, particularly in House of the Dragon, is sort of the divide between haves and have-nots, because Dunk is definitely a have-not. He's from like the slums of, I think, King's Landing, and he's just this big, lovable doofus, and he wants to be a knight. Egg, who is his squire, is wise beyond his years, and he knows things about Westeros and how it works politically, just street level, that you're like, who is this kid? And so that kind of bond between them, this big brother, little brother, big dumb brother, very smart little brother kind of thing, almost like in the cartoons where it's like, you want to go beat up on a cat, Spike, like that kind of vibe between them.
Right.
And I just loved it. And it's, and you bond very quickly, and there's a lot of, just warmth and humor in that relationship,
Yeah, that sounds great. I mean, that sounds always the stuff that was relegated to the edges of Game of Thrones. Like there's some comic relief bits, and there's a storyline or two here or there that you get to kind of enjoy some lightheartedness. But even down to the runtime of these episodes, I mean, they're sitcom length. Like
they're only about half an hour, like 32 minutes. The longest one I want to say is 42. That's the first one, because they're just setting up things, but within the first 10 minutes, all the stakes are there. Characters have met each other. You're literally on the road. So they don't waste. There's not a lot of meat on the bone. They really get the thing going. Like that's been one of the complaints about the other Game of Thrones shows, is that there's bloat. They're just treading water. There's none of that here. This is every minute counts, and it's great. I mean, you're just along for the ride. And then there's also like another aspect of the show that I think people will find familiar if you did watch the other shows, is Dunk and Egg are sort of a kinder, gentler version of like the Hound and Arya. Remember when I forget which season it was, but it felt like they were walking trip for like ever. It was like Lord of the Rings. They just keep
Well,
walking.
in the first season, it took a month to get to King's Landing, and then
This is
that
before
changed.
the express routes were put in.
Right.
But like Dunk and Egg have that kind of like, what if the Hun was just a big dopey Paluco,
Sure.
kind of the Rodney Dangerfield of Westeros? Like he gets no respect. Like he just walks in, and even the stable boys like, get that F out of my way. Like even though he's 6'6", nobody respects him.
No, that's cool. So, I mean, it seems like all the ways that it's trying to sort of separate itself from the other franchise entries of Game of Thrones are, you feel like they're very much a feature, not a bug.
Yeah. No, it's a feature. It's not, it's something that it endears itself very quickly to the viewer. And mind you, look, I didn't go into this thinking like, oh, I will automatically love this. I was like, you got to prove yourself, because look, I really like House of the Dragon and Game of Thrones, but I get why people have issues with them, and I see their flaws. I like that world, and I like that fantastical riff on history that it offers. But this one was pretty immediately, I'm like, oh, wow. It doesn't have any of those things that just leave me feeling gross after I watch.
Well, it's so easy to hate so many of the characters in those other shows, that it's, your mileage will definitely vary depending on how you feel about that.
Yeah, this is with the exception of some full frontal moments. This is kind of one you can watch with anybody. I mean,
You watch it with the parents?
if your parents like F-bombs and
Sure.
stuff like that, but it's not like you don't have to know the history of Westeros. You don't have to know about the one that is promised or whatever, all that prince that is promised. You don't have to know
all the
any
stuff that gets a little too sprawling and bloated and makes the other ones
you
feel
don't
too
need
long.
to know any of that.
All right, well, Jim, I'm sold. I'm in. This is, and the other thing about this show is it really kind of snuck up on me. Like, it's our job to keep tabs on these things, and even I was like, oh, there's a Game of Thrones show coming out in like 2 weeks, which is exciting.
It's been thankfully not too overhyped.
Yeah.
Well, it'll be nice for people to kind of hopefully organically kind of discover this and be like, oh, actually, I like this one. It's not going to piss me off or make me write an angry diatribe of a feature.
We don't want that. While we're still in a good mood about this show, let's get out of here. But thank you for chatting with me more about A Night of the Seven Kingdoms. And thank you guys for watching. For more movie reviews, more TV reviews, for more of the comings and goings of Westeros, be sure to subscribe to IGN wherever you like to watch.